Right, so we've come to the segment of our program where we discuss innovation in education, reorientation for human flourishing. And in this session, we really are trying to understand how we go about creating educational ecosystems such as policies, structures, curricula, learning communities, even assessments in different global contexts to promote flourishing for all. I'm so delighted to welcome my speakers for this segment. Let me introduce to you our presenter, Andreas Schleicher, who is the Director for Education and Skills at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We will also, in our panel discussion, be joined by Vinh, who is Eurasia Learning Institute for Happiness and Wellbeing. That's where that's the organization represents. We also have Charles Odong, who's the head teacher of Project Shelter in Wakadogo, Uganda. And we have Dr. Pilvi Torsti, former state secretary in the Ministry of Education and Culture in Finland. I really look forward to hearing your insights and thoughts on this fascinating topic. Before we get started with our conversation, let's welcome Andrea Schleicher to give us our presentation for this segment. Over to you, Andrea.
Thanks so much, Redi. You know, we live in amazing times. You know, globalization and digitalization have connected people, cities, countries, and continents in ways that have vastly increased our individual and our collective potential. But, you know, the same forces have also made the world more volatile, more complex, more ambiguous. We're seeing this growing disconnect between the infinite growth imperative and the finite resources of a planet, between the financial economy and the real economy, between the wealthy and the poor, between the concept of our gross domestic product and the well-being of people, between what is technologically possible and the social needs of people. You don't want to hold education responsible for all of that, but we should never underestimate the role that the knowledge and the values of people play in social, in economic, in cultural development. If we want to see a different world, we have to see a different education culture. You know, technology, globalization, and climate change, they all have disruptive implications for our economic, for our social structures. But those implications are never predetermined. It's just the nature of our collective responses to those disruptions that is going to determine the outcomes. You know? And that's the interplay between technological frontier and the culture, the social, the institutional agents that we can mobilize in response, education included. And in this world, education is no longer just about teaching students something, no, but about helping them develop a reliable compass and the tools to navigate with confidence through the world. You know, success in education today is about building curiosity, opening minds. It's about compassion, opening hearts, and it's about courage, mobilizing our cognitive, social, emotional resources to do something, to take action. And surely those are also our best weapon against the biggest threats of our times. You know, ignorance, the closed mind, hate, the closed heart, and, you know, fear, the enemy of agency. In contrast, the kind of things that are easiest to teach and easiest to test have become also easy to digitize and automate. We know how to educate second-class robots, you know, people who are good at repeating what we told them. But in this age of acceleration of artificial intelligence, we need to think so much harder about what makes us human. And this is where the concept of human flourishing becomes central. The conventional approach in school is often to break big problems down into smaller bits and pieces and then train students how to solve those pieces. But modern societies create value by integrating different fields of knowledge, making connections between ideas that sort of seem unrelated, not connecting the dots where the next innovation is going to come from. In the past, schools were technological islands with technology often supporting and conserving existing pedagogical practice, rather than transforming it. Now schools need to use the potential of technologies to liberate learning from past conventions and connect learners in new and powerful ways with new sources of knowledge and also with each other. The past was divided, with teachers and content divided, subjects and students, often separated by our expectations for their future careers. With schools often designed to keep students inside and the rest of the world outside, often with a lack of genuine engagement of families and also a reluctance to partner with others in society. The future needs to be so much more integrated, with an emphasis on the integration, the interrelation of subjects, the integration with the world of work. In today's schools, students typically learn individually. And at the end of the year, we certify their personal achievement. But the more interdependent the world becomes, the more we need great collaborators, great orchestrators. Schools need to help students learn to be autonomous in their thinking, to develop an identity that is aware of the pluralism of modern living. At work, at home, and in the community, people need a really good understanding of how other people live in different cultures and different traditions, and how others think, whether as scientists or as artists. And the foundations for that don't all come natural. We're all born with, bonding social capital, a sense of belonging to our family or other people who look like us, who work like us. Common pursuits, common kind of ideas, but it's actually requiring really hard work to create the kind of bridging social capital through which we can share experiences, ideas, innovation with others, and increase our radius of trust to other people. And to make headway, we need to really reimagine education. Take a fresh look through the lens of, students who are true leaders for a better future. Teachers who are learners, good learners, and effective designers of innovative learning environments, and communities that are not clients of education, but a resource, the energy of good learning opportunities. Surely, mastery of knowledge is always going to remain of utmost importance, no question about it. But we need to find ways to foster mastery of content, not at the expense of human flourishing, but through human flourishing, through agency, awareness, connectedness. We need to cut through educational laws, regulations, and structures that too often cloud our mind to discover the heart of education improvement. Think of the capacity to listen and listening, broadening our perspective, co-creating what is success really meaning and how can we see it. Think of the ability to learn and design, giving people ownership over what they learn and how they learn and where they learn and when in their lives they will learn. Think of our disposition to love and connect, building relationships, fostering sense of belonging, nurturing culture and humanity. Or think of our openness to reflect and to grow, to learn, to unlearn, to relearn at every level of the system, not just in the classroom, but also relearning as systems. It's all easy to say, really hard to do, but building a shared narrative in education has proved to be incredibly difficult. Yeah. All of this is easy to say, really hard to do. Building a shared narrative in education has proved incredibly difficult. I often ask myself, how the climate movement was able to build momentum in an area where the political economy of change is even more difficult than in education. Maybe the answer is that the climate community has been able to come together to agree on its North Star, the net zero agenda. We don't have a net zero in education yet, and that's why we see no coherence in education agendas and little fidelity in educational implementation. And the concept of human flourishing could really become the net zero of education.
That was really, really inspirational, Andreas. We really appreciate it, and also challenging as well. And I'm sitting here reflecting on my time at school. Of course, I benefited, that's why I'm here today. But I think there's so much more potential that was lost because we were not thinking about what human flourishing means. Thank you so very much for that. And I'm particularly struck by a whole lot of things that you said, but including your call that we must liberate education the old conventions. And that's where I would like to start then in this conversation. Let me start with the Eurasia Learning Institute for Happiness. Vinh, I'm picking on you next because you work in this space. You have experience with happy schools, gross national happiness, and with the International Red Cross. I just want to understand, from your point of view and experiences, why do you think that human flourishing is particularly important for education?
Thank you very much. And I really want to also express my appreciation. There's a lot that he said that we can really build on, and that really is like the red thread. So let me start with a simple observation. We had the COVID crisis more or less all over the world, and we saw the well-being of students, children, and adolescents really being challenged. And that only emphasized something was already there before, but that became more apparent, which is that there's a discrepancy between academic achievement and happiness and well-being, or human flourishing, if you want. And so I think that one of the big questions is, how do we develop a school culture, school system, school ecosystem, educational ecosystem that really focuses on the happiness and well-being of all the children and young people. And the Happy School project that have been now deployed in Vietnam, in Switzerland, in Bhutan, is based on the idea of 3 modes of care. One is children have to learn to take good care of themselves. Care being also self-knowledge, self-understanding, and so on. The second part is taking care of others and society. So first, like emotional skills. The second one is social skills. And the third one, obviously, is taking care of our beautiful and fragile planet. So I believe that these 3 modes of care for oneself, care for others, and care for our planet, could be the seed of developing an educational culture that brings human flourishing about.
Mm-hmm. We'll expand a little bit more on those themes that you've just touched on, but let me bring you in here, Pilvi, Torsti. You know, we all get used to a certain way of doing things, and it's very difficult to introduce change and transformation when we become experts in our field. To then be awakened to the fact that there is a better way of doing things can be a bit challenging and can invite some resistance amongst some. So how do we build consensus to shift mindsets in education policy and curriculum when it comes to human flourishing?
Yeah, hello, thank you. I think I would approach that question first from the angle where Andreas started, that we live in many ways amazing times to be alive, for the good and for the bad, but we certainly have many drivers, from digitalization to climate change, and recently all a major aggression war that we have to tackle with. So that already by itself, I believe, develops a context where no matter from what sort of education systemic background you come from, you are forced to ask and reflect that how does these amazing times, all different drivers actually bring about needs for change or rather transformation. And if there was one good thing, I think, with the pandemic, that it brought forward all these trends with some sort of intensity that we just simply can't overlook in any of our systems or societies. However, your question to sort of how do you bring about transformation where there is always resistance, I think is particularly relevant when we talk about education. As Andreas said, it's incredibly hard, and I think why, at least I try to develop 2 answers. One is education is always very long term, so it's very different from, for instance, political cycles or many other cycles. So that if we want to see something in 10 years, we better act now. And then perhaps the second theme, all these issues we've mentioned are global in their nature, while our education systems are national by their nature. I mean, we developed this idea of education for all as part of nation states in most of our countries in different times. And now we would need, we have an emerging global agenda. and to move from that sort of national mindset to that global agenda already by itself is a transformation in thinking. However, I want to stop my answer with a very positive note. In my lifetime and in my 25 adult years, I've never seen such a strong momentum in this sort of global education, transforming education, really world leaders gathering around issue. So I think there is a lot of potential and chance, and it's very important that organizations like OECD at the moment are driving this movement, because many countries also look into organizations like that to sort of not only take leadership, but also sort of to give comparisons between the systems, because that's very difficult from a one nation point of view to say what happens elsewhere. Thanks.
And just staying with you, Dr. Pilvi, because both Andreas and To spoke about this, but I do want to get your thoughts around why is it necessary? If you had a room full of people and you had to convince them that it is absolutely important to root our global education approach to the tenets and concepts of global human flourishing, why would you say it is necessary in our world today?
Well, I think we can answer by asking ourselves, so where has the current or present systems taken us? Well, yes, they have taken us far in many ways, but at the same time, we have the planetary issues, we have the well-being issues, and we have the equity issues. So I think that already tells that the current systems are not serving the world well enough for us to go with them towards the future that we sort of owe for our young generations. And this is particularly true when we look at the whole planet. I mean, the debate is very often in the sort of global north rather than global south. And if we look at where our young populations in this world are, our responsibility is even greater. So it's about the planet, it's about individual well-being, and it's about equal sort of social equality.
Okay, and I'm very excited then to bring you in here, Headmaster Odong Charles Kigundi, because you won the T4 Best School Prize for Overcoming Adversity, a word that has been mentioned since we started our discussion. So I'd like to know more about that and what it means to you. How did you get there?
Thank you so much, the moderator and everyone. My name is Charles Odong. I'm really very happy to share our personal experience about the award that we have recently won for the World-Based School Prize. In Uganda, as we look into the human flourishing, we see that there is need to bring many factors together, like the non-living and the living factors together. Under the living factors, we look into the various stakeholders for education, which primarily starts with the learner themselves. We have their parents, we have the teachers, we have the community in which the child lives, and we have the education department in the country, which we work together to ensure that really we are able to achieve our objectives. So being one of the schools that has been one of the winners for the World-Based School Prizes, this has been a great milestone for Wakadogo School and all the community in Uganda, because when we look at the kind of work that we deliver in a very difficult situation, we are able to still change the lives of the people in this community to make them achieve in life. Our children come from the poorest background, where they do not have enough food to live on. Their parents do not have money to pay school fees. But with coexisting, we are able to support this team, and they are able to realize their dreams. So as Wakadogo School, looking into the achievement that we have won, we have been able to share our expertise, how we have really been overcome adversity in Uganda. For example, we had the longest civil war in northern Uganda, and it is one of the adversities that we overcame, and followed by the COVID that came in place. We are not able to do any online learning because of the lack of computer knowledge and the resources in this community. So our teachers embarked into moving door to door to teach children in a smaller group. So by moving into door to door and teach children, maybe one student in one home and then another one in a different home, has really given a good opportunity to share with our colleagues who live in the similar situation like northern part of Uganda, which is very far much behind other part of the world.
And so I want to bring you in here because Charles has been speaking about adversity, and he touched on a theme that Andreas spoke about, that our schools, that I'm paraphrasing here, but where communities are not just consumers of education, but we create one a community that is diverse, but that has the same focus on well-being and flourishing. I just want to get your thoughts here around what Charles presented, the real socioeconomic challenges that many societies face. The children still have to go to school. They are still children, whether they're living in a war zone. We have the war on Ukraine, for example. The Middle East has its own conflict. The Horn of Africa, a famine that is imminent. All those conditions are conditions that children did not choose, yet they still have to be educated and be part of a school community. How do you convince us? How do you persuade us that human flourishing is not only important, but is possible even under those uncertain times?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to Charles for a wonderful testimony about the work in Uganda. It's very moving. As you mentioned, I used to work for the International Committee of the Red Cross. It means I've spent a lot of my time in war zones. And I really felt that education was one of the tools for resilience for children. Because, children have fundamental needs. Of course, the first one are the physical needs. Children need to be fed and have a roof and so on and so forth, obviously. But then children also need emotional security. It's almost as important. Well, of course, first you have to eat, but then as soon as you have eaten, you need emotional security. It's part of the child's makeup. And a school community should be able to offer emotional security, should not add to the stress, right? And a child needs to feel integrated, included in a society, in a social community. Again, school plays a huge role in allowing the child, especially if the family is maybe broken, if somebody has died, if it's orphans, then the school can offer this social integration. And then, of course, children love to learn. They want to learn and thrive and develop. It's part of human nature. We want to grow, not only physically, but also mentally, spiritually. And that's, again, what the school can offer. So I think if we really focus the mission on the school of attending to the well-being, to the flourishing of the children, the school plays a role that goes far beyond just passing on knowledge. And as Mr. Schleicher very rightly pointed out, it has to do with education, not only of the head, but also of the heart and the hand. Mm-hmm. So the global education of the whole human being. And I think we need to rethink education in this direction. And this is true for countries at war, poor countries. I've been working in Vietnam for many, many years. We started right after the war. The country was completely destroyed. And we saw that education could play a major role. But it is also true for so-called developed country. I just came back from Stuttgart 2 days ago, and I was giving a presentation there. In a city like Stuttgart, they have 180 nationalities. Mm-hmm. You bring 180 nationalities under one roof, right? So this is a totally new task for educations. And it goes far beyond just learning the language and learning math. It's really about education or the school community as a human community where the child can really flourish and develop.
I'm smiling because I'm a mother of 2 little girls, and I marvel at how their education and their experience of school has changed from mine. So that ability to be agile, to adapt, to reflect the society in its entirety. Andreas mentioned the concerns around climate change. You too, Dr. Pilvi, you spoke about that we don't have a choice given how the turbulence in the world. So the education system has to adapt. Now, Dr. Pilvi, let me bring you in again. From a flourishing point of view, do you have ideas around the ways in which education systems can practically put in place innovations that can support the broader aim of human flourishing in education? What are some of those innovations that we can think of in the immediate future?
Yes, thank you. I will have two, I guess, somewhat boring or more quite obvious examples, and 10 sort of one program example. The first, very obvious but hard to achieve, if not innovation, but a precondition, is that you really have a good education for all as the principle. Because if we talk about transforming and flourishing, so if it's limited just for the few, we don't do much service for the current situation, actually. So that needs to be really addressed. What does it mean to serve all and with quality? And the second sort of quite obvious, but I think very rarely spoken, is the element of political decision making. We need to discuss the sort of transforming education towards flourishing as its goal, also in the sort of political context, because at the end of the day, we will need political support, financial support for the approach. Minding you what I said in my first answer, that the education systems were born to serve nation states, and now we have to transform our education to serve the greater purposes of life, which do serve the states as well, but the sort of political decision making has to be kept on board. And therefore I was very happy we had this fall the UN summit, Transforming Education Summit, as part of the UN General Assembly. So it really also shows there is this transform agenda on sort of on those decision-making tables too, not only among those of us as activists in education. And then the third, as examples, I have personally found very inspiring in the international baccalaureate and in the schools called United World Colleges, there have been for decades something they're called social service as part of the curriculum. I had a privilege to do that program in myself 30 years ago in a school that was just next to former Yugoslav border where the war was ongoing. And every weekend, we as 17-year-old students would actually teach young refugee children English so that they could then emigrate to other third countries like Australia or US and escape the war. And now I think it's time to think, could we perhaps pilot in systemic way in different countries, something like that. And yesterday I just learned here in Singapore, there is something what they call value in action program. That is very similar to that, so that you work with elderly people, you work with minority communities, but those projects always come from students or pupils themselves. So it's not given from above, but it's actually born within the school community or the student or the pupil community. So that's one, I think, innovation that I would really push forward, because through that kind of service orientation, you can address issues such as well-being, climate change, sort of ethics of digitalization, whatever interests students. But once it's part of the sort of curriculum, it means it's for all and not only for those that choose to do that. So that to me has been an inspiring example for decades with United World Colleges and the IB, and now it seems to work in Singapore. So why not broaden it also for other places?
And that takes me very nicely to you, Charles. Everybody's talking about education system, the ecosystem that accommodates all. I mean, you have experience, as we were hearing, on working and creating the school community. But can you just share some thoughts, some specific thoughts around a holistic response to adversity? What does that look like? A holistic response. What factors did you have to incorporate in your strategy?
Thank you so much. When we look at the holistic approach into overcome adversity, first we need to start by identifying the needs of the students. Then we go around to try and see who can help to meet these needs of the children. Like in our situation in Uganda, when our children were locked down, they could not have access to online learning, they could not have any learning. So we had to move into their villages, first to ask their children, their parents, what can we do so that we can continue to support these children? So we found that the only way we could support them was through face-to-face learning. So we started mobilizing the local leadership in this community, and we also contacted the district leadership in this place. So when we look at a way of addressing or overcome adversity, it is not single-handed. One person cannot do it. You need to bring various stakeholders together so that really be able to achieve whatever we have in plan. But to make us successful, we need to understand the need and the culture of the community so that we are able to enter in the community and we are able to support them according to their needs and the culture. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. So I don't know how you feel about this. This is it's a challenge, but it's also exciting, right? To be able to have schools and communities that truly reflect a plurality of voices in society. And Andreas, you use that word as well. But just on that, I mean, how does the education system gear itself and position itself in the global context to cater for learners of different abilities as well? Because that also poses its own unique challenges, doesn't it?
Actually, when I first started my work in Vietnam after the war, we started by working with children with special needs, so children living with disabilities, because these were the children that didn't have any access to education, obviously, because the country was very poor and it was a challenge even to educate so-called normal children. So, you know, and we had a lot of children who had been victim of the war, Agent Orange and so on. So we focused first on that. And the lessons learned was that working with children, so-called with special needs, actually gives you a much more holistic picture of what human beings are or what it is to be human. So as long as we're in the academic system, we tend to think of the learning in terms of math, science, and language, more or less, you know, what is the usual. But when you work with children that are different, then you have to look at a much fuller picture. And what we then realized when we then started working in the overall educational system, that what we had learned, trying to find ways for children with different abilities, I wouldn't say disabilities, but different abilities, was actually things that also the other children also needed. Things that I've mentioned, like, for instance, social and emotional learning, focusing on emotional intelligence, focusing on social skills. We have spoken about the importance of collaboration and teamwork, and because they can't do it alone. So for them, it's quite natural to do it together. But then all children actually need that. We also noticed the importance of working with practices such as mindfulness, because many of them had very, very short attention span. So, but then we realized that, well, mindfulness is something that all the children need, because this sort of age of distraction in which we live, you know, with the screens and so on, make it very difficult for children simply to sit and listen. And it's no point just shouting at them, be quiet and listen. You have to, it's not that they don't want, they don't know how to do it. So actually, and now we have programs where, for instance, we have this, you know, I said we speak about taking care of nature and of the planet. So we have created big organic gardens in Vietnam. And the kids, so-called with disabilities, or the kids with other abilities, spend much more time in the garden. They're the one then teaching the kids coming from the regular school how to take care of, you know, how to grow plants and how to do organic gardening. So it becomes a win-win situation where you realize there are so many different abilities, and all these abilities can contribute to society.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Pilvi, you spoke about the innovations, you spoke about the opportunities, but I want to hear then, what are the challenges to implement change? Because outside of this conversation, we need to be realistic about any obstacles that lie ahead so that we can devise the right responses and interventions. What do you think are the challenges then towards implementing change and the journey towards human flourishing?
Thanks. I will take the liberty to just first briefly comment to what was said with the Vietnamese example, because it's inspiring and it's very similar to what I have been able to. I've been a little bit involved with a friend in India, where they have introduced something called happiness curriculum. And that's actually based on the kind of ideas we had to some extent in Finnish education system. So child-centered, inclusive approach, and holistic approach to learning. And with that, and now it's practiced in several states, it really has improved the ability of all children from very privileged backgrounds also to come to school. I know we don't have time to explore it more, but have a look at the Indian. I think it's a good example of innovations. Well, what are then the challenges? I mentioned already earlier this relationship, I think, that needs to be addressed, which is education and politics. And it's not only important for the reasons that relate to sort of funding or bringing about change, but it's also, and I used the example of my country, Finland, where when I look at the different reform phases, the first one for the whole comprehensive school, that was the school for all, and also recently a reform that, again, in the secondary level was a major reform. There is never consensus. I mean, there is always a political debate. And so you have to be prepared for that debate and be sort of persistent, develop arguments, develop also the sort of evidence basis. And therefore, conferences like this are very important because we hear, yes, examples, but also those examples start to develop actually into a relatively strong proof that something works in a certain context. So I would really stress that as a major challenge. Not only I'm not suggesting that the sort of political decision makers would necessarily be against, but that there is never consensus, and one should not be sort of naive about that. And then thereabout, of course, follows budgets and so on. Of course, the second element is what we already addressed, that everything, when we discuss systemic level, it's always very long term. So any change typically is successful if you actually introduce it somewhat gradually and new ideas. So it easily takes a generation actually to get it through, both with your schools, teachers, public, and children. And so the time in that sense is a little bit of a challenge very often. But on the other hand, it does also puts us into a huge responsibility, because if we don't take action now, I mean, we are the ones also to be looked into after 10 or 20 years. So therefore, one has to look towards sort of bravely towards the future and try to analyze where are we going to. And I think that analysis is suggesting that this sort of human flourishing as a goal for education perhaps is a very good concept, and in a way brings together different elements that we've been sort of working around for years. And in many systems, we have many elements of that. So no one should understand me saying that, okay, let us forget the systems we have and let us have something brand new. But we need to address issues we have and see whether our systems are fit, and they are not. And therefore, this concept of human flourishing can bring an angle that helps us to address, I believe, the questions we need to address.
All right, very sobering commentary there. But let me bring you in again, Charles, because you've got practical experience of this. If there are some leaders who are listening to you today, and they also want to win the T4 Best School Prize for overcoming adversity and really rooting their communities into human flourishing, what advice would you give to other school systems then? What can they implement to overcome adversity and promote flourishing in their countries in the way that you have?
Thank you so much. I've been really on the front line of working towards human flourishing before, and we are continuing to work on the same. So my advice to my colleagues is that in order to achieve in networking with other people and to develop the concept of human flourishing, you need to work as a team and never give up, even if you are working in a difficult situation. Because when you are at a fix, the door will open for you and will move to the next level. So at our level, it is important that we keep the doors for learning open. Every time we can learn from other colleagues, we get new ideas, and we can really try to realize. So as the next step, what I would like to say to my colleagues that we really need to attend and organize more of this kind of conference so that we can sensitize the masses about different approaches we can use to promote ecosystem education and to see that we are promoting human flourishing. And if we could have more ambassadors, the country ambassadors, to help us support this program, is going to be a very important way of disseminating information to our colleagues, especially in the low developed country like Uganda, where not many people are involved in the social media. So it will be very important that we have like more, and this can be the school leaders and the district education leaders who can help us to be the ambassadors so that we are able to work together to promote human flourishing in the whole world. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so very much. So now we are going to get closing comments. So I ask a question, but include in your response your closing comment. Let me start with you, Tlhabi, Eurasia Learning Institute for Happiness and Wellbeing. You've all shared real practical case studies of where human flourishing has manifested and has been absolutely visible. You've shared commentary around challenges and the potential for human flourishing. So where do we go next? What are your thoughts around what now needs to happen to make human flourishing so mainstream in the way that we educate and build education ecosystems?
I think the first and the most fundamental building block is the teachers themselves, because if we speak about human flourishing, if we speak about well-being, if we speak about social and emotional learning, the teachers have to embody these qualities. You cannot just preach it. You have to be a living example. So we often use the term "happy teachers will change the world." So we need to have happy teachers, you know, and being a teacher should not be kind of the last choice if you didn't manage to go into a more prestigious kind of studies. But actually, it should be, we should have the best people in the country, in all the countries, to be the teachers, because in a way they are the most important people in the country. They are the ones that are really building the future. We recently had a conference in Vietnam called Happy Schools, and I was very happy that we had 500 school principals from all 52 provinces of Vietnam. So I think the time is ripe. There's a general feeling that something has to happen. So I think, you know, a conference like this one, and I really enjoyed what Charles said about the like ambassadors. We need to have like a body of, you know, human flourishing ambassadors within the school system, without the educational system, that really promote this vision of education that is really centered around the well-being of each and every children for the well-being of the planet.
All right. Oh, thank you so very much. And your closing comments with the same question, Dr. Pilvi, where do we go next?
Thank you. Firstly, after working in different ways in education and science most of my life, I still continue to believe that education is the most efficient way to change the world, but it's very long term. And therefore, in this current context, where do we go next? I think we just must be stubborn to build the kind of global approach and also community, because even we now perhaps feel that, I mean, this is obvious, everyone understands this cause. Most of our teachers, pupils, parents work in their local, national contexts. So it will take a while that this sort of global movement will reach everybody. But this brings us back to where Andreas Schleicher mentioned the North Star of climate movement, where it's been the net zero. So the North Star, perhaps in education, can be the common goal that finally unites the whole globe around human flourishing, that takes into account individuals, the planet, and the sort of communal approach. We really need to stubbornly build this movement. So all of us are needed.
Well, I've really loved talking to you. I went down memory lane and remembered my own education, appreciated the efforts of my teachers with very little resources, but knowing that our well-being is something that they needed to invest in. And again, looking forward in what I hope my children will achieve as responsible, well-oriented, and flourishing citizens of the world. So thank you so very much